was the main one, and it's been abandoned, so all the consortia that were using that for direct consortial borrowing have moved away. I'll talk more about that later, but that's a different genre of software. It is, you can use it to populate either a physical or virtual Unity catalog, and then you do different machinations to attempt to kind of move circulation transactions in and out of these ILSs, and to support direct patron requests across systems. But it's an approach. Not many places use that as the primary interface. If you don't find it in our system, then you can go to this other system, has Union Catalog, and then you can find it there and request it. So it's the difference between being a resource sharing system on the side versus the primary discovery service. So that's at least how I think about that genre of software. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about are some of the trends in technology that I'm saying that's kind of sitting behind a lot of the transitions in systems that we're seeing in the library realm. Start off by saying that having the right automation infrastructure these days either makes or breaks a library. If you have the wrong system with the wrong infrastructure, it's like you're swimming uphill all the time. You're fighting the system, it's not working efficiently. Any technology ought to help you be a better library, following what your strategic directions and initiatives are. It should enable you to do what you do, not be the thing that's always in your way. If it's in your way, then there's something wrong with the way, with your environment that you need to think about. Well, what is wrong? We have the right ILS, do we have the right discovery system? Is it supporting what's going on in the library? Because it's got to do that, or you're spending a lot of money on something that's not as productive as it should be. In aggregate, libraries in the United States spend $500 million a year on this kind of technology, things that include integrated library systems, discovery systems, resource sharing software, RFID software. And $500 million is a lot of money that we all have invested in these kind of technologies. So we want to make sure that money is pretty well spent and spent in ways that really help us do what we do. So technology is in transition now. When I started at Vanderbilt almost 28 years ago, it was in the days of the mainframes, and we put together our Notice system. And that was the way automation was done. We were moving away from our catalog systems into the first generation of automation, and the kinds of computers that were available to do that on were the big mainframes. The only thing that could really handle all of that. And so that gave way to client-server computing. So, things with graphical user interfaces, get away from the million-dollar mainframe, have a more lightweight server in the middle that can take care of what it has to do. But basically it was trying to leverage, these desktop computers that in some ways already had more computing power than the mainframes. So client-server computing was kind of the wave of the future in 1984. So libraries moved to new systems, things like Unicorn and I forget what some of the others were that were adopted as client-server systems. So those were well used. Those are a lot of the systems that are in use today. They have a graphical user interface, a client you have to install, they talk to some server. So that's great 1980s computer architecture. So what we're in today is a phase of computing that's based on cloud computing and web-based interfaces, where there is no software necessarily installed in your library in consortia. It's delivered through software as a service, hosted in a different kind of way, up in the cloud, as a lot of people say, but in some kind of data center where the server, it's a cluster of servers that deliver a service to an organization that they can use for their business automation purposes. So that's kind of the wave of the present now, is this cloud computing era. And the library realm is moving into it, sometimes in earnest and sometimes not so much. It's happening across the broader IT sector. Things like Salesforce.com has been the way that companies have organized their sales and customer relationship management operations for many years now. So in library automation, cloud-based systems have been in development for the last 3 or 4 years by some companies and not others. So, but anybody who is writing software today will not write it to be run on a server that lives in somebody's on-premise organization. You write new software to be deployed through software as a service. Whether it's for libraries, for drugstores, anything, because that model of computing is going to be phased out just as much as mainframes were phased out by client server. The whole approach to how you build software and deploy it has changed over time. It gives you a lot more flexibility. Once you do it that way, it's kind of built around things like HTML5 and those kind of things, so you can have things like responsive web design so that any interface that you display is kind of equilaterally consumed by a smartphone, a tablet, or a big laptop. So those are the kinds of things that are kind of built into software when it's built into these models. So of course, libraries are in transition. So any technology that's deployed has to do what libraries do today. I would suggest that libraries today don't do mostly print. They mostly do other things, right? Public libraries are more engaged with print than others, but your ebook interest is skyrocketing. So, if your system isn't kind of built from the ground up to do, integrated ebook lending, it's missing something now, and it's sure going to be missing something later when that might represent 80% of what the business transactions are around ebooks. So, you've got to figure out what does a library look like today? Does it have the right kind of technology to support it? And academic libraries, the transition from print to electronic is, very far along. And the journal side of things, it could be 100% in most libraries. Academic libraries. How many academic libraries, check in serials anymore? You might have a couple. But you look at your collection budget for serials, it's probably 90% plus, on electronic subscriptions. Monographs are a little bit behind that curve, but in these days when all collection budgets are slashed, what's the first thing that goes? It's the monographs, usually things like anything but kind of firm orders, right? So approval plans, all those are gone. Most libraries will buy monographs only on specific request. Public libraries are different. You still have shelves full of books that circulate vigorously. I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. But when you look at the patterns of how public libraries are used, so much of it is remotely, so much of it is the e-books. Is that an add-on, or is that something that's integral to the way that you manage your library? Libraries are changing. And how you manage metadata, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, or a conversation about RDA, but that's such a small piece of things that, when you acquire content electronically, you don't get them one at a time. So I just bought this collection of 30,000 books. I'm going to key those MARC records in, right? No, you've got to have some kind of, life cycle metadata management where you're able to get high quality bibliographic records without having to touch each one of them. How do you do that? I think the future of libraries depends on mastering those kinds of problems. Again, that's a pretty sharp break away from the current models of original and copy cataloging. It's going to apply to an ever smaller set of things. Your special collections and those kind of things, they'll continue to require, that kind of, boutique expert cataloging, but, the bulk of circulating collections, you've got to figure out ways to do them more en masse. The current systems are built around MARC. You've got to keep in mind, MARC has a certain amount of time before it dies, right? BibFrame will replace MARC if your system, if your workflows, if your thinking is built around MARC, and you're not thinking about the world of linked data and the BibFrame model for instantiating library bibliographic data, you've got to make sure that you're prepared for that, I would say, inevitable future by now. So, that's going to have a big impact on kind of the back end of library automation systems. Any system that was kind of monolithically built around MARC is going to have a hard time surviving in the future 5 or 10 years from now when we try to deal with bibliographic information and linked data model. So if that's ever a hot trend that you should be following, it's linked data. And every conference seems to be talking about that a lot. We've already talked about this shift from different paradigm shifts. You hear it called that sometimes, to this kind of cloud computing model that you would have. That if you have a server in your library, in your consortia, that model computing is losing favor. Almost every library I talk to, and they say, well, our server's at end of life. What do we do next? What they do next is get some kind of hosted service. Very few organizations are saying, we're going to rebuy a server to put our ILS on, because that will just be obsolete again in another 4 or 5 years, and it will always be constrained, right? It will always be constrained. You can get far more computing power, through infrastructure as a service, through software as a service, than you will ever get, from, well, in this case, this is a stack of storage servers at the Library of Congress. This is about 20 petabytes, I think. So they're not that constrained, but the picture. More and more computing is virtualized, so that you don't think this application runs on this box. How you deploy software is changing quite a bit. So all moving toward cloud computing, one way or another, and want to make sure it really is. Because there's this phenomenon called cloud washing, where now that this is what people want to do, you want to say that your system does it, even if it doesn't. So, you can get our service in the cloud, when it may not really be that. It may just be a vendor-hosted legacy system on their rack instead of yours. It didn't really move into the realm of cloud computing. It is just a vendor hosting model that's been present since the early 1990s, was when library automation systems were beginning to be offered through this hosted service. Didn't really change the way it works. You're still installing clients, and so when the next upgrade comes, you're the 300 desktops that are running that client. You still have to upgrade all of those all the time. It's a huge difficulty in client server management. That goes away in cloud computing. It's all browser based. So if there's a new feature, a new version, it just happens. It may be that, well, this new feature is available, you go to your management console and enable it when you're ready. It's not like you have to reinstall software. So it's a whole different approach to using software. And it scales infinitely. And I kind of mean that too. When you think that the Google search engine is simply just a cloud-based search application. It's distributed across hundreds of thousands of computers around the world. It's one application, one code base, they all work together. So it just scales to that. When you think about, we have one server in your office, how much can you run 1 million records? What's the capacity of that application on that server? That just doesn't apply once you move to cloud-based technology. So if it's clusterable, if that's a word, you just add more boxes to the cluster, more virtual boxes. So that's, you can scale it, for as much as you need and you can pay for, but it expands kind of infinitely. That's what they mean by elastic. So you're never constrained by hardware these days. And that's kind of a big deal. Cloud computing has advanced. This is the Gartner Hype Cycle in 2009, 10, 2011. So in 2012, they say there's not a hype cycle for it because there's all these different versions of flavors of cloud computing, and so you can find cloud computing all over the hype cycle curves. So this is the mainstream approach to business computing these days. changes a lot of things. It changes the way you manage your budgets. Instead of saying, I'm going to buy hardware, and I'm going to buy maintenance on the hardware, I'm going to buy an Oracle license, I'm going to buy software, and I'm going to pay a capital license fee for the software, and then maintenance on that, and then pay people to babysit, to take care of the hardware, and have a lot of people involved in maintaining this local server. Instead, you're just paying a subscription fee. All that's kind of done for you, and an annualized fee that displaces a whole cluster of costs that you otherwise incur locally. So, that, I think a lot of libraries kind of like that. Some of them don't. I mean, can you get annual budgeted money year by year, or are you better at getting capital money and then paying maintenance on it? So, having it in your budget, is really good for the software as a service model. But that's kind of the reality of how paying for technology has changed as you move into the realm of software as a service and so forth.
Marshall?
Yes.
I think you can run into some resistance from a self-interested IT department.
You can, but they've got plenty of other things to do. How do you want to use your people? Do you want your best technical minds kind of making sure Linux is up to date and kind of tweaking the operating system and doing kind of this impossible task of security management? Or do you want them kind of working higher in the stack and working on apps and using APIs to be able to do things to make your library better? So you can make the argument is you can make their life a lot more interesting, and you can have them make a better impact on your organization because they're not working on plumbing, they're working on user-facing tools that will benefit the organization. And we don't hire, how many of you have plumbers on staff? If something breaks, you pay people to do it. It's not strategic. And I would also suggest that, operating servers is not what libraries strategically do best. I was on a panel with someone from Amazon recently, and he was talking about one of his data centers, and he said, for this one data center alone, I have 200 security engineers on staff. So I think libraries kid themselves about how secure their systems are, how well managed they are, how scalable they are, how much downtime they have. We're doing things that are better done for us in a lot of cases. Is that our core expertise? So yeah, you will get some pushback, but you can also say, there's a lot more things, we're not going to take your job away, we're going to let you do something far more interesting.
Marshall, has there been much research or just an overview of library services that are in the cloud? Because I think you're right on the money here that I think one of the movements you will see is that the cost of your data center and maintaining that infrastructure can have a big ticket price.
Yeah,
But
just
if you move
electricity alone,
yeah,
not counting
or
personnel.
just replacing the UPS
Yeah.
and the AC units. But as you move into the cloud, are you opening yourselves up, not just, I think what you're saying is better security, but your data is now in a different environment. So what happens to data that is not housed by you? In other words, is your data now being...
So now is not a technical issue, it's a contract issue.
Yeah.
Do I own my data? It's
Oh,
your
I
contract, I own it. What's my exit? If I exit, I get my data.
Not even just that, but it can authorities access that data without even knowing?
That can happen if it's in your own library.
Yep.
Because the same legislation applies for any kind of government request, whether it's hosted by you or a provider. And it crosses, unless it's your server in your building and your building isn't connected to the internet, it's just as detectable, right?
Yeah.
So again, you're the difference in security is, I would say an access policy and ownership is something you have to deal with, but it's not like it's safe and secure in my area, and it wouldn't be if somebody else wants to. You can talk about where they want private cloud, so your stuff is kind of rolled off from other things. There are lots of different technical and business approaches to how you deploy data-based resources in a cloud environment.
Private cloud is kind of an oxymoron.
Not really, I mean, so if you're a bank, you know, you wanna make sure that, there's encryption between you and your neighbor.
Right.
But with libraries, we have, you know, a different set of concerns. I think that's still my mark records, please, but, you know, that's, kind of think about our patron data. So, right.
Well, it's the patron data that I think is what
Yeah.
we focus on, that privacy, even though the trend overall is that the public is more than willing to trade off that for some sort of ease of access. So that's why I'm wondering, is there much being said as far as libraries that are still concerned about their patrons' reading history and circulation history, the fact that now it's in the cloud?
Yeah, but you do all the same kinds of things. You normalize, you anonymize data after books return. So all those same kind of things you can do independently of whether it's locally housed or remotely housed. And, you have to kind of understand how all those things happen and be comfortable with it. But I think there are ways to be comfortable with it, based on, different technology configurations and more business arrangements. Who owns this data? Can you guarantee me that I own this data? And when I exit from your service, what data do I get out? Because when you have it in the cloud, that's even a more important question to ask than when you have it locally deployed, because somehow you can wrangle your data out if you have a local server. Which people think they can. Until it sort of dies, it's not there anymore.
We need to take a break for a reload of our.
We can do that anyway.
camera. We'll take it we have to reload our camera, so we're gonna take like a 5-minute break and do that.
Okay.